Welcome to Brandon Hall Group's Excellence at Work podcast. You will hear from industry leaders covering innovative, cutting-edge business, learning, and HR topics that weave current market research and technology into each episode. Our Excellence at Work podcast is hosted by Brandon Hall Group's Chief Operating Officer and Principal HCM Analyst, Rachel Cook.
Hi, and thank you for tuning in to Brandon Hall Group's Excellence at Work podcast. Don't forget to subscribe. Today with me joining, we have Dave Wentworth, Brandon Hall Group's Principal Learning Analyst. Hi, David. How are you doing?
I'm good, Rachel. Good to be back with you on the podcast.
Yes, and we got a new platform since you joined me last, so we're having fun here with our new platform, and it gives us a little bit more flexibility in our editing. So we hope everyone's enjoying it as well. And then also with us today, we have Asha Pandey, the founder and chief learning strategist from EI Design. Hi, Asha. So nice to have you with us again.
Hi, Rachel. Hi, David. It's a pleasure to be back again.
The pleasure is ours. And today we're going to be talking about one of the recent webinars that you two collaborated on. The topic is how to create a stronger bond between learning and performance. So we're going to dive into your expertise and some of the questions also that were brought up during the webinar. And I would like to share with our audience today also that EI Design and your team, Asha, as the leader, received 17 Brandon Hall Group Excellence Awards in 2021. That's remarkable and outstanding. Congratulations.
Thank you so much. We intend to double the number this year. Yeah.
We are right now. Our team is in the trenches of evaluating the applications, and so this year is certainly going to be a big one. So stay tuned, everyone, to see all the excellence that have come out of organizations like EI Design and other leading learning and talent leaders. So we're excited to share with all of you the best practices. And so for today, let's go ahead and get started. Why don't we start with the first question I have for both of you, and Asha, if you can kind of lead the way here in the discussion around what, from your perspective, why is there a disconnect between learning and performance?
Yeah. So while of course there are many factors, what I've seen, there are three which we encounter pretty much everywhere when we have this conversation. Oddly enough, the start point is the fact that when the whole exercise begins, the training training need identification onwards, is the fact there is no strategy which is getting defined to tie in the training to learning to performance gain. So this is the first bit. Second is that while all projects undergo a detailed training need analysis, but true understanding of why business needed this particular training, right? What is the anticipated performance gain, or is there a challenge that it is supposed to address? This bit is again rather fuzzy, right? The third in itself is the fact that what is the definition of learning, right? So most of the training programs tend to cover the essential part, which is largely the acquisition of learning, right? So very rarely would you then see that your training investment is resulting in the right kind of training, right kind of learning, and thereon the performance gain. So these would be my top three factors which I see fairly commonly across the customers or prospects that we talk to. Uh, Anything,
Yeah.
David, would you like to add to that?
I mean, obviously, you're spot on, and there's a lot of different things at play. I think one of the biggest issues is we talk a lot in all of our research. One of the things we always start with is how complex today's environment is, and how much pressure there is, and how busy everyone is. And when you translate into your everyday job, from the top to the bottom within L&D, it's the same thing. Everyone's sort of focused on what they need to get done, and what ends up happening is learning is very much focused on the process of learning.
Yeah.
And that is the end goal, right? The end goal for the learning team happens to be, can we build this thing? Can we roll it out? Can we get people to take it? And now we're on to the next thing. And so they're almost solely focused on that efficiency piece, on we need to do what our job is to create this thing, deliver it, get it out there, and then move on to the next. And they're not really given any space to sort of stand up and say, how do we fit into the biggest, the bigger picture? How does what we do impacts the organization at these various different ways? And it's very challenging because more and more we're seeing organizations forced to do more with less, and it's very hard sometimes to recognize that it's critical to maybe tap the brakes and make that connection so that all the work that you are doing, it has much more value than simply just going through the motions, which is what ends up happening.
Certainly.
So we understand why there is a disconnect, but what can we do to help bridge that disconnect between learning and on the job performance, as we know is critical to to the objectives of the business and to retaining and engaging our people.
Certainly. So I think what I believe, Rachel, that the exercise needs to begin by defining what the learning is, right? So
Mm-hmm.
while it starts with the acquisition of information or knowledge that we are talking about, unless it is accompanied by room for practice, room for application, sometimes even augmenting it with elements like coaching, very specific mentoring, room for maybe figuring it out in a safe zone before you are ready to truly say that the learning has happened, right? So the first and foremost shift, I think, starts with understanding that what truly is the definition of learning. And when we understand this, then we start aligning all elements to meet this specific goal, right? So that's really the start point. The second is about the learner. The whole exercise is about them, but very rarely do we see when we are working with our customers as well as prospects is the fact that TNA looks at what the learners should be given. It's still the org view, right? The learner need analysis, which is the LNA, which is truly the learner view, can be sometimes dramatically different, right? And we all know that the learning effectiveness and the learner preferences, if these two tie in, you're going to see the desired impact, right? And so much has changed in the way learners wish to consume the content. They're equally clear on what they don't want, right? So if we don't factor for this perspective before we undertake the more rigorous training need analysis phase, we're not going to quite see the link getting established or forged in a stronger manner, right? And then the second
Mm-hmm.
important part is that we set out on the journey without having clarity on how we are going to be measuring, right? What we intended to and versus where are we hitting finally, right? And this whole approach in itself requires a complete change in focus from very discrete cyclical trainings to what we are clearly seeing now as an ecosystem where we are talking about learning journeys which have the core learning, which is what typically organizations focus on predominantly, to extended learning journeys, and then making it multimodal, making rather designing them in formats that truly resonate with learners' asks and expectations, right? So I believe that these are the focus areas with which, if we sort of relooked at the picture and recharted the way forward, we are going to be able to establish that strong connect between the learning to the performance gain.
Absolutely.
And I think that the another key element for L&D teams is just to have better relationships and conversations with the other parts of the business and managers and business leaders, because um, the idea of getting what learning needs from the business has to be more than listening to a leader that says, "Hey, I need this training program, get it or build it for me." There has to be a conversation of, okay, I understand that you want this particular program. Why do you want this program? What is it that you expect people to be doing better or differently after the program? And then as a learning professional, I can help you translate that into learning elements that will actually drive those things, as opposed to just assuming that the business knows what the learner needs to move forward, as well as also the business just assuming that learning understands what the performance outcomes should be. There has to be that conversation so that there's this continuity. And, it can get overwhelming to think that, you start to think about business outcomes from a learning perspective. And ultimately, that's the goal, right, is to help learning achieve those big outcomes. But we have to start at least creating a better connection between what we actually expect individual people to be doing differently and better, and how do we craft the learning programs to do that? And that talks to Asha's point about those learner needs. It's like, okay, the business is telling me you need this from these people. My job as a learning professional is to know how to deliver the right kinds of elements to this particular audience for this particular bit of skill or knowledge, so that happens. And it's never a one size fits all.
Right. And that's a good segue into my next question around how do you empower your employees and drive learner autonomy? If what you're saying is that, we need to ensure that the learning is aligning to the persona or the needs of the individual, how do we continue that, that ebb and flow of that? And then part is, driving that learner autonomy so that the learning professional has the ability to create that content and the relevant
So
content.
correct, Rachel. So one of the things that we see all the time is that, see, best of the programs which may have ticked all the boxes from a learning outcome or the business needs still continue to lie on the shelf. There isn't enough population which is taking them on, right? So I think the start point is the motivation, right? And motivation comes from a sense of understanding that the value that the program brings for me, right? It makes me do things better. It helps me upskill so that I move to the next level, or whatever is the case, right? And with the changed workplace dynamics where we are multitasking like anything, right? I would decide to make that investment only when I see the desired value, right? The other important part really is that we are talking of the autonomy for the learners is the fact that, I mean, as adult learners, we all want the control and the power be with us, right? We do not want mandated learning elements, right? We want learning to be within our workflow. We want the flexibility to pull what we require, right? So the autonomy is, I think, is very, very critical. And I always connect it back to the learner needs analysis component, which to me is the start point of the exercise. And so if you were to map it to a series of concentric circles, the LNA, and then you have the outer core of the TNA, right? And to this, gain that we want to see, the self-directed learning is an option which needs to be made available, right? So we are talking about democratizing learning, right? So that's where I think it is connecting. And for me, the focus areas that we just talked about, right? The start point is the learner preferences, their asks, and one of the important bits is the control that they ask for, right? So I think that's where it fits in.
Mhm. Yeah, and again, I come back to managers and supervisors. There's often in organizations, and we hear this when we do a lot of interviews with different companies. We hear this a lot that um, often team leaders, supervisors, managers, there's a perception that learning elements are actually um, an obstacle to the work that they're trying to do with their teams. It seems to get in the way of the work where, well, I've got all these people working on these things and they have to stop to attend some sort of learning program and then come back. We have to work with those leaders to change that perception to, look, we've developed this variety of opportunities here that are tools for your team to get better and to have what they need. You get the team leaders, those managers, supervisors on board, and it changes the perception. And soon it's like, then part of that team language that they speak is, as you're working on these projects, if you run into an issue or if you have a question, here are all these assets and resources that are available to you when and where you need them, and you're able to get them when and where you need. So that self-directed, that autonomy, you take control of your learning, which in turn helps you take control of your performance, your development, your growth within the business. It's really about that sort of culture shift of, if your organization doesn't see learning that way, or certain parts of your organization don't see learning in that way, you have to change that so that you give the learners that autonomy that they need. Because otherwise, you can give them all the directed learning you want, and they'll never touch it because it'll be seen as, well, I don't have time for that. It's not helpful. So you have to change the perception for sure.
Yeah.
Well, we've been seeing too, in a lot of our conversations with organizations where, as you mentioned, Dave and Asha, where it's more driven from the leaders about what they, how they vision the learning and the culture of learning, and a lot of it is, embedding that in everything that they do, and not bringing them out of their day-to-day jobs to
Yeah.
just go to a training course, but where they have access to multiple channels of different types of support and chunk size bits, then you see the success of it, and how it's being applied to their real initiatives throughout their day-to-day you know activities. So that's really empowering, is when leaders and where they can make that available. And so, we talked also, Asha, you mentioned a lot about assessing the needs of the learners and the needs of the organization, and understanding where the gaps are. And so, how, because, in theory, that is seems simple, but, how do you create that strategy, or what are the best practices that you find in identifying those skill gaps and formulating a skill strategy?
Right. So the sort of the schema that we work with is fairly simple, right? When we work with our customers, we talk to them saying that give us where things stand today. It's a very simple situational analysis, right? And there is then the desired state, right? So now a lot of times they may have already implemented some of the programs, but there is a misalignment in the intended outcomes, right? Or everything is in place theoretically, but they are not seeing the eventual impact, right? So we follow a very simple process of looking at where things stand today, what is the eventual or the desired state, and amongst this whole thing, and at the cost of overstating probably the obvious, is that first validating with the learners, is this aligned? Then validating with the business that truly was this the gap identified and was this supposed to be the fix? Very often, Rachel, we find that the training is not the only intervention that's going to help us fix the gap. But very often, these supporting elements may or may not be in place, right? So upskilling strategy needs to have all of these facets, right? So it obviously starts with the org view, clarity on the desired gain that the business seeks, at what scale, and eventually it enables the learner to do what, right? And then we piece all of these elements together and see, besides training, also, is there something more which is necessary, right? And even within the spectrum of training, it needs to be multimodal, right? Different learners expect to learn through different channels, right? So whether it's formats, it's the combination of social, self-directed, coaching, mentoring. I think all of these elements need to be in place, right? So what we expect is that people need to move away from a much narrower focus, which is limited to content adequacy to meet a given outcome, right? Why, of course, that's a very, very crucial and a foundational element, but that is not all, right? And this is where, then you have to see that if you were to look at it in terms of a self-sustaining, continuous learning mode, many other elements need to be in place for it to be really successful. So upskilling is a combination of all of these elements, is the way we see it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, and organizations have to remember that when they start talking about employees and the workforce and learners, is they're people. And even if we're all in the same organization and everybody's all bought into the organizational culture, everybody's still different. They have different needs and different ways of getting things done, different ways of being successful. And then you combine that with all the complexities that go into the various different skills and knowledge that we're trying to deliver. All of those things are very different. The idea that you can accomplish all of that with a handful of courses and classes, clearly is not going to get it done. That's what Ash was speaking to, I think, is this variety, the ability to meet various needs. And it is, yes, about the learners, but it's also, the other variables are, what is the thing you're trying to do? Maybe the outcome that you need, that performance gain that you're looking for, can't be delivered in a classroom. And that's not to say that event-based learning and courses don't have a place. They clearly do, and a strong role to play in the whole learning ecosystem. It's not necessarily about replacing; it's about expanding and having more opportunities to meet these specific needs. So you've got the time frame in which you want something to happen. You've got what the outcome is. You've got who that particular audience is. Adding to the fact that we're now in an environment where you might have a very large population of remote workers versus in person, right? Sort of that hybrid environment. So that changes the needs dynamically too. If you're not putting together a variety of opportunities, there's just no way to get everything done through that narrow lens that Asha had described. So it really is about providing opportunities. It isn't just, let's do everything for everything's sake. It's making sure you've got the right tools for the right people at the right moment.
Right. And, in today's world, do you think it's easier to be a learning leader? And what do you, as we wrap up today, I'd love to get your kind of your thoughts on what do learning leaders need or what do they need today to be successful?
Yeah, I think the changing workplace dynamics, and we are going to continue to see volatility at many levels, at least in the near
Hmm.
future, right? To me, the challenge and opportunity is interoperable term.
I like challenge and opportunity.
Right. So I think it has also brought in the learning leaders in the spotlight, right? And I do believe that the enhanced position that they enjoy would also help them drive the degree of change which is necessary, right? And I mean, till a few years ago, when we used to talk about informal learning, people would say anything I can't touch and feel, why should I invest on, right? And till a few
Sure.
years ago, social learning, it is too casual for it to actually add any value to learning, right? We've moved up from there, right? Then till a couple of years ago, self-directed learning, if I can't check whether they went through it or no, does it really work, right? Today we are saying
Hmm.
that it aligns best in the schema of learner autonomy, right? So all these changes are a clear reflection of when we choose to adapt to the change, we can deliver more, right? So while it isn't easy, but I think you also have a plethora of options. There are models which show you the way forward, right? So that's how I think I would look at it. I think it's time to uh, probably look beyond what we've done in the past. At some level, you can do away with what you were doing in the past and embrace the change. And I think change is good.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think you're obviously spot on with the whole the idea of the challenges and opportunities. It isn't easier or harder now than it was. I think both things. The challenges have gotten more complex, but the
Yeah.
opportunities have gotten much broader. And I think to me, if I just picked one thing, I think I would stick with the sort of the opportunity side. That here's the great thing about what it's like being an L&D leader today is that technology has gotten to a place where if you think of it, if you have an idea, this grand plan or scheme, something that you can come up with, chances are you can actually execute on it, right? Where you're not limited by the technology that was. And I've said this in the before, like in the past, learning was shaped by the technology that was available at the time, and we're still seeing a lot of that legacy hangover where learning is still based in what was available back then. That's what set the foundation. But the truth is now, um, we can shape the technology to match what we want from a learning experience. We now have that freedom, that opportunity. So if you can dream it, to be a little maybe over the top, but if you could dream it, you can make it because those tools are available to you now, and I think that's the real great opportunity.
Hmm. If you have a dream, they will come. What a great way to wrap up today. Thank you, Asha. Thank you, David, for both your perspectives. And thank you, everyone, for listening in to us. And we hope you enjoyed our discussion as much as I did.
Thanks so much,
Thanks,
Rachel.
Rachel.
Thanks, David.
Thank you, Asha.